I was about to die. I don't know when it happened, but my camera must have been damaged. It's probably toying with me now, waiting for me to open my eyes so it could make me watch as it devours me. But there was only silence. I finally opened my eyes. It was supposed to be a nice break from the real world, a getaway to my cabin in the mountains for a few days to collect myself after the awful past few months. I bought my property from some old miners who had run the mountain dry. The cabin they had built only needed some minor improvements, and the remains of their fruitless mines made for some cool features to show friends. The big mine near the cabin couldn't even be called a mine, as they had essentially blown open the entrance to a cave wide enough to get tools inside. The night before I was going to head back, the largest rainstorm in a century hit. All roads leading back to civilization were flooded, and there was no chance my crappy car could hope to make it through. I wasn't too upset about it, just thankful I still had enough food to last me another few days. The truly awful part was that the shoddy power system I made had gone out, and my phone had died long ago. I needed to wait a while for the solar panels to charge, so I decided to make the best out of a bad situation. The rain had made the woods truly beautiful, and I still had around a dozen Polaroids to use in my camera. The walk was truly amazing. The rain had made the green in the forest even more vibrant, and the canopy had provided enough cover that I wasn't soaking wet. Only problem I ran into was the insane amount of broken branches on the trail. I knew the storm had been bad, but in my years of owning this cabin, I had never seen this amount of clutter pile up in such a short time. I had no idea how so many branches below the canopy had broken. I had been walking for a few hours before it started to get dark, and I decided to head back. I suddenly came up with the bright idea to take a photo of myself to commemorate the time I got rained out in the mountains. I turned on the flash and timer, setting my camera down on a nearby rock, and backed up a few feet. The only thing I heard before hitting the ground was the crack of wood splitting. Something had hit me in the head. Hard. Still dazed, I tried to figure out what just happened, but whatever hit me didn't give me the chance. It grabbed my ankle, rolling me onto my stomach and raising my leg into the air. There was a sudden blinding light, and everything stopped. I heard the Polaroid eject from the camera and softly land on the ground. I laid there for a minute, praying for the ringing in my head to subside. It took me a while to wrench my ankle free from the thing's hand and sit up. The person, monster, whatever it was just standing there, frozen. After the ringing in my head started to go away, I finally started to comprehend what I was looking at. It looked like a human, but the proportions were all wrong. It was too skinny, to the point where I could see every rib, bone, and tendon. The skin was taut, gray, and wet. One hand was open, palm facing towards the camera, as if it was trying pointlessly to hide its face, if you could call it a face. Its head looked mangled, dented, and bumpy, as if a child tried to mold a human skull out of clay. The eyes were the only part that resembled a human, although they looked empty somehow. The monstrosity had a piece of my calf between its pointed teeth. I had no idea what this thing was, but I figured that the flash from the camera had somehow stunned it. I got up to grab the camera, but the pain from my leg shot through me. I had to grab a stick off the ground to balance on as I stumbled to the rock. I saw out of the corner of my eye that it was moving. It was so slow that I could barely tell, but its outstretched hand was definitely moving towards the camera. I wasn't about to let it destroy the only way I could defend myself. Pushing myself through the pain, I grabbed the camera and started back along the trail towards my cabin. If I could only make it back there, I had some only hunting gear that could maybe kill it. I don't know how long I had been walking. My bad leg and the cluttered trail made it painfully slow to traverse, and I tripped any time I tried to speed up. I counted 4 remaining Polaroids, but I was more concerned about the flash. I needed to make sure nothing damaged it, or I would be as good as dead. I noticed some landmarks, saying I was about halfway back to my cabin when I heard the branches breaking behind me. I ducked off to the side of the trail and looked up at the trees. I saw a dark shape swing past me, moving faster than I could comprehend. It only made it a couple yards past me before it stopped, crouched up on a branch, searching, searching for me. I readied my camera, pointing it at the creature in case it leapt at me. We stayed like that for some time, so long that it got dark enough I could barely see it. The rain clouds had covered up the moon, drowning the woods in an oppressive darkness. I would have had no idea it was there, had it not been for the faint glow from its eyes, replacing the emptiness I had seen in them before. I nearly jumped out of my skin when it finally left, clambering onto other branches. I waited for a minute, making sure it was gone, before stepping back onto the trail. I had taken a few steps when I heard something drop behind me. I turned as fast as I could before, Polaroid ready, and took another photo. It just was a stray branch, broken by the storm. I breathed a sigh of relief before realizing how grievous this mistake was. I just told the creature exactly where I was. I tried to run down the path, but I could already hear the approach of cracking wood. I backed up against a tree, aiming my Polaroid up in preparation. It landed on a branch above me, crawling down the opposite side of the tree to stay out of sight. I crawled away, but it was too fast, grabbing me by the shoulder. I managed to turn and point the camera, barely getting a photo off. I heard the Polaroid shoot from the camera and fall to the ground. I had to use all of my strength to pry its gangly fingers open. I turned to see the creature staring me in the eye, its bloody mouth open in a scream. I could already see it starting to move again. It wouldn't stay frozen for as long as it did last time. Not wasting any time, I started back on the trail. I was freezing cold and drenched to the bone. The remaining energy I had was fading, fast. I made out enough landmarks to know I was close to my cabin. A little less than a quarter of the trail was left before I made it. I hadn't heard any signs of the monster, but I figured it was freed from whatever shock the flash put it in. It wasn't long until I could reach my cabin, but if I kept pushing like this, I would trip and roll down the side of the mountain. I decided to sit underneath a short tree a few feet off the trail, making sure to hide myself underneath the leaves as best I could. I rested my head against the bark, catching my breath. Using my brake, I checked on my leg only to find it a bloody mess. I put my camera in my coat pocket as I tore apart my pants to make a makeshift bandage. When I lifted my head, I saw the faint glow of a pair of eyes staring at me. It was following me, silently this time, just watching. As quickly as I could, I reached for the Polaroid and took a photo. I saw the blinding light and heard the gears push the Polaroid to the ground. But when my eyes adjusted, I saw nothing but trees. It moved out of the way. The creature leapt at me from behind, not about to give me the chance to get away again. It pinned me down, holding me with a force I had no idea it was capable of. I stared at it, waiting for it to bite into my neck and tear out what remaining life I had left. Before I could come up with a way out, it grabbed my face and forced my head down onto the ground. Everything went black. I woke up to the rough coldness of stone. I slowly sat up, feeling the back of my badly bruised and bleeding head. It was pitch black. I couldn't see my hands in front of my eyes. I stretched out my hands, feeling the coarse rock that surrounded me until my hand drifted to a warm puddle. Following the liquid to its source, I felt coarse hair. It was a dead deer. I felt next to it, finding another dead animal, slowly discovering an ever-growing pile of animal corpses, all with their skulls caved in. That creature had brought me back to its den. Did it think I was dead? I reached into my coat pocket and let out a sigh of relief when I felt the familiar plastic of my camera. That relief suddenly turned into terror as I heard scratching coming from somewhere to my right. It must have heard me. I only saw one way out of this. I climbed into the pile of bodies, covering myself with organs and small animals. I heard the creature turn a corner, pacing around the room as it searched for me. The cover I made must have been good, as I heard it walk past me. The sounds of it walking slowly dwindled until I heard nothing, moving as quietly as possible. I slid out from under the pile of corpses I made, walking towards where I heard the monster enter. My progress was slow, but I kept quiet and hoped I had picked the right way to go. Just when I was about to give up and turn around, I felt hope, a breeze. I followed the breeze out, crawling through tunnels and shimmying through corridors until I could see the faint outline of an entrance. I leapt out of the cave, allowing myself to fully breathe for the first time in forever. Collecting myself, I searched around the outside of the cave for some kind of landmark to tell me where I was. I then saw a faint light to my right. It was my cabin. Whatever this monster was, it had brought me to the old cave near my cabin. It was pitch black out now, the rain still coming down hard. Thinking of the best course of action, I heard an ear-splitting scream come from somewhere deep in the cave. It already knew I made it out. I limped towards my cabin as fast as I could, throwing open the door and locking it behind me. The power had come back on while I was out being chased, and I wasted no time making sure every door and window was locked or covered. I was lucky the old miners only built one tiny window at the front of the cabin. I scrambled to find where I had left my phone, only to remember it was out of battery. I plugged it in, realizing I needed to wait until it was charged before I could leave. I wasn't getting through the storm in my car, so all I could hope for was to get far enough to reach a signal and call for help. Remembering my hunting equipment, I got out my rifle and some rusty foothold traps. I set the traps up at every door and a few spots in the cabin. The only thing to do now was wait for it. I lit a fire in the meantime, letting the warmth soak into my bones and harden my resolve to survive. It didn't take too long to hear scuttling along the outside of my house, going up towards the roof. I had never been more glad for a fire, knowing it couldn't go through the chimney without getting burned. The scuttling increased in speed and the sound, as if the creature was getting frustrated. It couldn't find a way in. It then started pounding on the doors, running between them, testing which one would give in first. I shot at the doors until my ears were ringing and my shoulder was numb. But the thing never stopped. I heard a crash as the window at the front broke, the monster's elongated arm reaching through and flailing around in an attempt to grab me. A few shots from my gun dissuaded it, but then it decided to make its own entrance. Using what I could only imagine to be a large rock, the thing relentlessly beat on a wall until the wood started to split. No matter how many shots I put through that wall, it wouldn't stop breaking it down. I was frozen there, trying to think of a way out of fighting something I couldn't kill or trap. But it was already too late. The monster crashed through the wall, immediately rushing me and hitting me across the room. I sat there, the wind knocked out of me, watching as it approached. It knew it had me. No matter how many foothold traps it stepped in, it never slowed its approach. I wanted to save it in case I had to make a run from my car, but I had to use it now. I pulled out the camera, aiming it at the monster, and took a photo as it started to run, trying to stop me before I could press the shutter. I heard the gears grind and the Polaroid drop to the ground, but I closed my eyes when I realized it. The flash didn't go off. I was about to die. I don't know when it happened, but my camera must have been damaged. It's probably toying with me now, waiting for me to open my eyes so it could make me watch as it devours me. But there was only silence. I finally opened my eyes. Its hand was only a foot away, reaching for the camera. It was frozen. I looked into its eyes, but something was wrong. That haunting glow was gone. All I saw was that familiar emptiness I had seen when it first attacked me. Confused, I dropped my camera and scrambled around it, going for the door. Something stopped me, and I looked back at the creature, seeing its hand slowly starting to move. I thought it was reaching for the camera, but it was going for the Polaroid. I cautiously approached, grabbing the Polaroid before the creature could. I expected the photo to look normal, but I instead saw a gray haze in the rough shape of the monstrosity standing before me. The haze in the photo looked as if it was moving, writhing around as if trying to escape. Taking the photo had ripped it out of the monster, and it wanted to go back. I knew what I had to do. I limped to the fireplace and tossed the photo in. The creature immediately started to scream. I imagine it would have deafened me if shooting the gun hadn't already. It dropped to its knees, its pale skin bubbling and bursting. It crawled towards the fireplace, using the last of its fleeting strength to fight against the burning agony it was in. In the end, it was too slow. By the time the Polaroid was ashes, the creature was only a pile of misshapen bones. I grabbed my phone and car keys. I drove it as far as I could, but the shitty thing got stuck in the mud a few miles out from the nearest town. I managed to limp the rest of the way, pushing myself with energy I didn't know I had. I'm writing this in the home of a kind stranger as they try to call the police, but they can't get out here due to the storm. I should be able to upload this account with the little signal I can get. I'm realizing now that I should have stayed in my cabin, as all I've done is sentence another poor person to die. I see their eyes, out in the tree line, dozens of glimmers as they stare at me, curious, waiting, watching. I don't know if taking photos with my phone will work. Even if it does, there's no way I can stop them all. I'm posting this as a warning. Stay out of the mountains. They've come to take back their land. My aunt hit my mother, so I dragged her across the floor and punched her till she passed out. My aunt is a poisonous woman. Our whole family doesn't talk to her. She's done things in the past you wouldn't believe, so she left our lives years ago. Recently, she returned out of the blue at my mom's house. My mom has two other sisters and a brother. My mom and aunt never got on. My mom is a lovely person, but she could sense from a young age something was off about her sister, so she kept her distance. My aunt was nasty and would hurt people's feeling intentionally for no reason. She never had a partner or kids. She isolated herself from everyone. My gran cut her off when she tried to steal thousands of dollars from her. We all genuinely think there's something physiologically wrong with her. So back to where I was going with this. One morning, I was at my mom's house, just chilling out, and there was a knock at the door. So I opened it, and there she was. She walked in. She looked like she had took drugs. She looked dead behind the eyes. I tried to stop her, but she pushed me down. I honestly don't know why she came to my mom's house, out of everyone. I quickly got up, and she went into the kitchen. She startled my mom and punched her in the face. My mom didn't even have a chance to blink before she hit her. She went down like a ton of bricks. My heart felt like it had been sucked through into my stomach when I seen it. Something came over me. I don't know if it was anger or adrenaline, but I ran up behind her and grabbed her hair, and I dragged her out onto the back lawn, and I bashed her face about 15 times. Blood was everywhere. Thankfully, no one seen me, or I might not have been writing this right now. I got up, and I left her there. I went to check my mom. She was in a lot of pain. I looked back out the window, and she was gone. We told our family immediately about this, and they were perplexed and angry as to why she just turned up and attacked my mom. I'm still so hurt and angry as I write this, but I also feel tremendously guilty and upset that I done that to her because I've never fought anyone and I'm not a fighter at all. But something came over me and I snapped. I can't get over it. For some reason, it just seemed so unreal, and there was no reason for the attack. God forbid she had a weapon that's truly scary to think about. We didn't call the police, as I assaulted her badly and didn't want it to bounce back on me. That's another thing I feel ashamed about. But should I feel bad or not? I need others' opinions as I've been bottling this up for a while. My gran was devastated. She just wanted her daughter back, but from a young age, she took to drugs, spent time in prison, and amount of other things. You can't help someone who doesn't want to be saved. My family has always been strange, not the fun, quirky kind of strange, but the kind that leaves you feeling uneasy when you're alone with them. I grew up in a small house with my mom and older brother, and we didn't visit extended family very often. My dad left before I could remember him, and my mom refused to talk about him. Every family gathering felt forced and awkward, filled with whispered arguments behind closed doors. But one thing seemed to unite everyone in my family: the house. For decades, my relatives talked about the family house as if it were alive. They'd say things like, "The house remembers," or "You can't lie to the house." I thought it was just one of those creepy family traditions. That changed last year when my grandmother passed away and the house became mine. The house was an old Victorian on the edge of a forgotten town, surrounded by dense woods that seemed to stretch forever. My mom warned me not to move in, but I didn't have much of a choice. I couldn't afford my apartment anymore, and selling the house wasn't an option. My family made that very clear. When I arrived, I found a letter waiting on the kitchen table. It was written in my grandmother's shaky handwriting. 1. Never leave the windows open after dark. 2. If you hear tapping on the walls, don't respond. 3. Keep the basement door locked at all times. 4. Do not go into the attic. 5. Always set the dining table for two, even if you're alone. At first, I thought it was some kind of prank, but as I explored the house, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The air felt heavy, like it was pressing down on me. The floors creaked, even when I wasn't moving. The mirrors, there were so many mirrors, seemed to reflect things that weren't there. That night, I followed the rule about setting the dining table for two. It felt silly, but I did it anyway. As I ate in silence, I couldn't help noticing the chair across from me. It creaked as if someone had just sat down. Around midnight, I heard the first tap. It was faint, like a fingernail on glass, coming from the hallway outside my room. My heart froze as I remembered the rules. Don't respond. The tapping grew louder, more insistent, and seemed to move closer to my bedroom door. I sat there, holding my breath, until it finally stopped. When I worked up the courage to check the hallway, I didn't see anyone. But on the mirror opposite my door, there was a small smudge that hadn't been there before. It looked like a child's handprint. The next morning, I decided to check the basement. I know it was against the rules, but curiosity got the better of me. The door was locked, but the key was hanging on a hook by the fridge. When I unlocked it, a cold draft rushed past me, almost as if the house had exhaled. The basement was pitch black, and the air smelled of damp earth and decay. I descended the creaking stairs, my flashlight flickering as if it didn't want to work. At the bottom, I found nothing but an empty, dirt-floored room. As I turned to go back upstairs, something caught my eye. There was a small wooden door built into the far wall, barely big enough for a child to crawl through. It was padlocked. The wood was scratched and dented, as if something or someone had tried to claw their way out. Over the next few days, following the house's rules became harder. The tapping grew louder and more frequent, coming from different parts of the house. The attic door rattled at night, even though it was locked. The mirrors began showing things they shouldn't. I saw shadows moving behind me when no one was there. Sometimes I'd catch glimpses of faces, hollow and lifeless, staring back at me. One night, I woke up to the sound of a voice whispering my name. It was soft, almost like a breeze, but there was no mistaking it. "Come down," it said. "Please come down." I knew the voice was coming from the basement. Desperate for answers, I started searching through my grandmother's belongings. I found old photo albums, family records, and letters that revealed a history of secrets. One letter, in particular, stood out. It was written by my great-grandmother and addressed to her son, my grandfather. It read, "We shouldn't have taken her. She belongs to the house now. Don't let the others forget. The house doesn't forgive." What did they mean by taken her? Who was she? The more I read, the more questions I had. My family had been connected to this house for generations, but no one ever talked about why. That night, I couldn't ignore the voice anymore. It wasn't just whispering, it was crying. The sound was muffled, like it was coming from deep inside the walls. I grabbed a crowbar and headed to the basement. The small wooden door seemed to pulse with energy as I approached it. My hands trembled as I pried off the padlock. Behind the door was a tiny room, barely larger than a closet. Inside, there was a wooden rocking chair, and sitting in it was a porcelain doll dressed in a faded white gown. The doll's face was cracked, its eyes empty black holes. Around its neck was a string of human teeth. As I stepped closer, The doll's head snapped up, and a child's voice echoed in the room. You shouldn't have opened the door. The next morning, I packed my bags. I didn't care about the family or the house anymore. I just wanted to leave. But as I drove away, something chilling happened. The town I had driven through on my way in was gone. There were no streets, no people, just endless woods. I drove for hours, but every time I looked in the mirror, the house was there, getting closer. Eventually, I stopped the car and walked back to the house. As I stepped inside, the door slammed shut behind me. I turned to the mirror by the entrance, and what I saw wasn't my own reflection. It was my grandmother's. Now, I'm trapped here, just like she was. The house doesn't let you leave. It keeps you, and when the next family member inherits it, I'll be waiting for them, just like my grandmother waited for me. This happened when I was 19 to 20. I am now 22. Feels like a decade ago. I've always struggled with anxiety, which led to social isolation, awkwardness, and eventually depression. For a long time, I barely talked to anyone. But when I started college, I made a few friends. A year in, I met a girl I was interested in. We had classes together, saw each other at the gym, and I finally worked up the courage to say hi. I even suggested we work out sometime, though I never asked for her contact info. Just starting a conversation was a big step for me. To my surprise, she found me on Snapchat and messaged me to make plans. We started hanging out, and I learned she had a long distance boyfriend. At the time, I told myself I could push aside any romantic feelings and just be her friend, even though I now realize that wasn't honest with myself or fair to her. We got closer over the months. We had so much in common, similar anxieties, shared traumas, and I found comfort in supporting her through her struggles. But over time, I became emotionally attached, more than I realized. She was distant at times, especially the week or two after breaking up with her boyfriend. But we continued hanging out and confiding in each other. I eventually tell her I have feelings for her, and she says she's never thought of me in that way before. So I forget about it. Fast forward a bit. We kept hanging out, and at one point, it seemed to me like maybe things could go somewhere, or maybe I was just delusional. I asked her if she thought she'd moved on from her ex, and that's when she told me she had actually been dating someone else for about a month. She said she'd kept it a secret because she didn't want me to leave or feel hurt. I was upset for a few minutes, but managed to pull myself together. I told her I understood and supported her, though I wished she'd been upfront about it. One breakup later, she called me, and we hung out. I comforted her, and we stayed friends. But I was starting to feel emotionally drained. I didn't know where this was going, but I kept holding it together for her because I wanted to be there for her. Things settled back into normal, and I found myself thinking, again, that maybe this was going somewhere. Or again, maybe I was just delusional. Then my friend called me to inform me that she'd been hooking up with someone else since her first breakup, the week when she had gotten distant from me. That stung, but what really hurt was who she had been seeing, a guy I knew to be a misogynist and an all-around toxic person. At that point, I lost it. I felt completely used, like I was her emotional crutch when things went wrong in her relationships. But she kept me at arm's length otherwise. I confronted her and told her I didn't know if I could be her friend anymore. I didn't handle it well. I let my emotions take over, and I'm not proud of how I acted. I need to share the hardest part of this story even though it's painful to revisit. After my initial outburst, I spoke to her the next day. She explained that she had been hiding everything because she was ashamed she didn't want me to see her as a war. I told her I would never think that of her, but I also didn't like being lied to. I invited her to lunch the next day and apologized for how I had acted earlier. For a while, things felt like they might get better, but then she told me she wasn't comfortable hanging out with me alone. Coming from someone who had once called me their best friend, that was devastating. It felt worse than any breakup I'd ever experienced. We started fighting constantly, and the pain became overwhelming. I couldn't even look at her without feeling a lump in my throat or tears in my eyes. My anxiety, which was already bad, spiraled. Eventually, I was diagnosed with chronic anxiety and started medication. But at the time, I was barely holding myself together. My therapist had suggested writing a letter and destroying it, but instead, I sent it to her. I don't remember exactly what it said, only that I wanted her to know how much I cared and how hurt I was about losing her. I told her I had to fight back tears and look at the ground whenever I saw her. In hindsight, it may have come across as overly dramatic, maybe even as a veiled cry for help, though that wasn't my intention. I wasn't trying to guilt or hurt her. I just wanted to be honest about where I was. I've since learned that not every truth needs to be shared. Months later, I heard something that shattered me. She revealed that she had been sexually assaulted by the same guy I'd heard she was hooking up with. She said she felt pressured and wasn't given the option to say no. This lined up with what I knew about him. He had bragged to me once about how hard she had been to get with, and even said she didn't want it to be real. Hearing that, I had no doubts about her story, and even though we hadn't spoken in months, I defended her to anyone who questioned her. Learning about what happened to her broke me. I spiraled into a deep depression that lasted over a year. I cried for days, feeling a crushing guilt that I hadn't done enough to protect her. One thing she said in her testimonial stuck with me. She mentioned feeling like she had no support, even though I'd been her friend at the time. I couldn't stop blaming myself, thinking I should have been there more or done something to prevent it. Intellectually, I know it wasn't my fault, but even now, I can't completely shake the feeling that I failed her. I tried to meet up with her several times to talk and make amends, but something always came up. Either I had to cancel or she did. When we finally set a time to meet, I showed up at her complex, but she started having what seemed like a panic attack over text. I tried to comfort her, but it only made things worse. Then she told me she didn't feel safe around me. Hearing that was like a dagger to the heart. I apologized and left, but those words have haunted me ever since. This was someone who once trusted me more than anyone, and now I was the source of her fear. I've never recovered from that moment. I stopped talking to everyone, withdrawing into isolation. I don't want to risk making anyone feel unsafe, so I avoid interacting with people altogether. Even though I know in my heart I'm not a predator, the idea that someone could see me as one keeps me from reaching out to anyone. I've been living in this self imposed isolation for years now, terrified of how others might perceive me.